Everton have officially sacked Frank Lampard as their manager and are in the market for a new manager with 8 days left in the transfer window, in the January transfer window. And despite all of this, they are still bringing in Arnaud Danjuma from Villarreal, and it has been reported and believed that Frank Lampard was key in these talks and bringing the player in. So we don't really have any idea what's going on, what their strategy is, who's going to come in and replace Lampard. So, without any further ado, guys, let's get into it. Pretty much every day I wake up and I thank God that I wasn't born an Everton fan, because the past few years just seem absolutely miserable for the Toffees. And the problems at this club are so much deeper than managerial stuff. It goes so much more than just Frank Lampard being the problem at Everton. Since David Moyes left in 2013, they have hired Roberto Martinez, Ronald Koeman, Sam Allardyce, Marco Silva, Carlo Ancelotti, Rafa Benitez, and Frank Lampard. Now, guys, the important thing to remember with all of these different managers is that they play completely different styles of football. Rafa ball is way different from Ancelotti ball, is way different from Roberto Martinez, is way different from Sam Allardyce. There is no overarching strategy or intelligent decision making going on under Mashiri at Everton right now, and this club is in a world of trouble for all kinds of reasons. They are facing financial fair play allegations. They are languishing in the relegation zone of the Premier League. They don't really have any talent in their squad outside of Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and Jordan Pickford. But Dominic Calvert-Lewin spends 6 months of the season on the injury table. There are problems up and down this organization. This fan base is absolutely rabid, rightfully so in some ways, but then they're also just extremely unruly in others. Classic Scouse, that sort of hooliganism is still a problem in this Everton fan base. The board members are being told not to come to matches because it's too dangerous. I feel so bad for the Toffees and for their fans, because this is a historic club. They are one of the 10 biggest clubs in English history, and they are very much at danger of becoming a fallen club, of becoming a fallen giant. Not even a sleeping giant, but they are in serious crisis and danger of it getting a lot worse. I really don't even know where to start with this one for you guys. I think the best place that we can start is what's going on financially at Everton. So they have been recording losses for 3 straight years, upwards of 100 million euros per year. That's ridiculously obscene amounts of money. Their spending has been scattergun. They have been all over the transfer market, spending incredibly unintelligently. So I want to actually take a moment and look at some of the transfers that Everton have done in recent years, because I think this is a really important place to start in actually understanding what's going on, because this is such a massive club, and they are facing just weird issues. Like they're in serious danger of not only being relegated, but falling down the division even further. And it could really spell, if they get relegated, it really could spell the end of Everton Football Club, especially as we know it. So this is from transfermarkt.com. Now, I know that they're not the best when it comes to their valuation of players, but they are really good at representing, at showing the actual transfers and players who have been moved throughout the books. So these have been the arrivals in the summer. Now, I actually think that they did a lot of really good work here. So I think Amadou Onana has been a really, really good signing. He can play at the base of midfield for a club fighting in those European spots, which is where Everton really want to be. That is where they have historically been throughout the Premier League. They had a few years where they qualified in the top four in the early 2000s. This is a much bigger club than their recent performances would suggest. So I quite like this signing of Amadou Onana. Dwight McNeil's not a bad signing. He's on the cheaper side of things from a relegated Burnley. Neil Maupay, the problem with the Neil Maupay signing is they've brought him in as a direct replacement for Calvert-Lewin, and he's not. What he can do really well is he can be like a false nine sort of player or a partner in a two-man strike partnership, but he cannot be the focal point of an attack. He doesn't have that goal-scoring record. I do think Neil Maupay is a really cheap alternative to Richarlison. They have really similar goal-scoring records. Over the past 3 years, Neil Maupay and Richarlison have almost identical goal-scoring records. Richarlison has only scored 4 more goals than Neil Maupay has for Brighton in the Premier League. That's really big. That's really, really big. I think Richarlison's a bit overrated, and Neil Maupay is a bit underrated in terms of what he brings to a Premier League side. James Garner, I really like this signing. He was signed from Manchester United. He spent last season on loan at Nottingham Forest. He's a midfielder. I don't know why he hasn't been getting minutes. To me, Frank Lampard seems like the perfect person to get the most out of James Garner. So if I had to really criticize Lampard, that's where I would go, is the fact that he should have focused his attention and resources on Garner, on getting the best out of him, and he didn't. He failed in that regard, so I'm not entirely sure what is going on there. Tarkowski and Connor Cody, I think, are both decent signings. Particularly James Tarkowski for free. That's good business. That's really good business. And then Connor Cody has been really, he's been a very solid performer for them in a back four, which is a little bit unusual for Connor Cody. He's more of a 3 center back sort of player. Someone, he needs a little bit extra defensive stability. But so these were all the people that they brought in the summer, and then of course these are the transfers that departed in the summer. So players like Cenk Tosun went out on free. Richarlison, they got a good chunk of money for Richarlison, and that was meant to alleviate some of the financial burdens that have struck the club of their own making. You know, they have no one else to blame but themselves. Mashiri has no idea what he's doing. Everton fans will be the first ones to tell you Mashiri is just, he's clueless, absolutely clueless. Moving back a year, this was of course when they were really, really hamstrung under Rafa Benitez for finances, so they made mostly free transfers. Now I do like this Vitaly Mykolenko. He came in on the left-hand side to replace Luka Dean, and Mykolenko has been a good player for them. Now Nathan Patterson here, I think this is also good business. He was young from Rangers. He wasn't going to get in that side because they have James Tavernier, who is their captain. He's their best player. Patterson isn't going to get the minutes that he needs to develop. I think he's 20 years old now. So this was a good signing. I think he's a long-term option to replace Seamus Coleman, who's been one of the better right backs in the league over his time there. And I think that this is a good signing, Nathan Patterson. Damari Gray for $2 million was a really, really good transfer from Bayer Leverkusen. He's probably been their best forward since he has come in. And that was a Rafa signing, as was Solomon Rondon, who has already left the club for in order to free up wages, and then now they have gone in for Anat Danyuma, who has been officially confirmed as an Everton signing. And then they brought in players like Anwar El Ghazi, Donny van de Beek, and Dele Alli on loans and free transfers. I mean, Donny van de Beek, I think, could have potentially worked. There's a lot going on with this player. He needs a video on his own. But then you look at some of the other players that have left the club recently. So Theo Walcott leaving to Southampton. I mean, he's an interesting player because he just doesn't play enough. Like he's not on the field. He struggles with fitness. Moise Kean, letting go of this player was a mistake. He's been one of the better forwards for Juventus since he's gone back to them, since he's returned to his boyhood club. James Rodriguez, this transfer just made no sense whatsoever. This was purely a Carlo Ancelotti signing. This is the why they brought in Carlo Ancelotti, Don Carlo, was because then they could make these star signings, these high-profile signings like James Rodriguez. And he's a very good player, but he just doesn't really fit into any. So, like, you need to be Carlo Ancelotti in order to get the best out of James Rodriguez. So for as a long-term option, this was just a mistake. This James Rodriguez signing, I don't really understand it. I know he came in on a free, but he was on really big wages. This is moving on to the year before, so this is going to be under Carlo Ancelotti. Ben Godfrey, I do like this signing, but that's very expensive. That's a very expensive player for someone who's pretty unproven. Alan, of course, he's not really ever caught on. Abdoulaye Doucouré hasn't had a good time at Everton. He's kind of getting scapegoated this year, and he looks to be on his way. Looks to be on his way out the door. So there's just not really any overarching strategy. Niels Nkunku, I don't even know who this is. In full honesty, I don't know if he's gotten any minutes for Everton. James, of course. Theo Walcott, Yannick Bolasie came back on loan. Yannick Bolasie hasn't caught on. Anthony Gordon was one of the things about Transfermarkt, what they do is they list the loans as well as players arriving and departing. It's kind of annoying, but if you learn how to read in between the things and learn the basics of it, it makes sense pretty quickly. Anthony Gordon, of course, I think he's actually a half decent player, but he's getting scapegoated pretty hard right now as well. He was linked, of course, for 60 million back in the summer to Chelsea, and I think Everton might be hindsight's 2020, but I think they really wish they could go back and take that deal. And you just see here, they didn't make any good. They didn't sell anyone. They haven't sold anyone for any decent amount of money besides Luca Digne and Richarlison, and they only did that because they were in such financial straits. Now, I know Luca Digne kind of forced his way out, but they haven't actually sold anyone for substantial amounts of money when they actually had financial freedom, when they actually had money to play around with. Even going back to before that, Moise Kean, I don't know why they didn't play him more often. He's been excellent for Paris, for Juve. He's been a really impressive player, and he could have been their next Lukaku. They haven't had a player like that since Lukaku, and he really could have been an impressive player for them. I don't know why they didn't invest more time into the Italian youngster. Alex Iwobi, now that's a big hefty sum, big price tag over his name, but he's kind of been half decent this year. He's been moved into the central midfield, and he's been all right for them there. He doesn't light things up. He doesn't really stand out, but he's been one of their better players in terms of being a progressive midfielder, a ball progressing midfielder. Now, I think this is another interesting departure. Ademola Lookman has, again, hindsight is 2020, and you don't have time in the Premier League to sit there and wait for a player to come good necessarily. But Ademola Lookman has been on fire for Atalanta in Serie A this year. He's the second highest goal scorer in Serie A behind only Victor Osimhen. He's been phenomenal for Atalanta, and he just can't stop scoring. He scored this weekend against Juventus, who has the best defensive record in Serie A, and I believe the third best defensive record in all of the European top 5 leagues. So Ademola Lookman has been really good, and he's one of those players where 18 million, you want more for that. Idrissa Gueye, of course, that is a good sale for 30 million. And I think this is around the time when Everton really started to decline, in my opinion, right before COVID happened. They sold Idrissa Gueye, and then they bought Alex Iwobi. They brought in Moise Kean, Andre Gomes, and no one for them really caught on. None of these players have stood out. And a few of the names that have just came and gone over the years have actually been good players in other roles. Ademola Lookman, Nikola Vlasic, Idrissa Gueye, Henry Onyekuru. There have been some good players for other teams that Everton have let slip from their grasps. So that's one thing. When we look at the transfer strategy over the past 3 years, there isn't any overarching theme. They haven't been buying players to fit into a more defensive style. They haven't been buying players to fit into more of an attacking, front-footed 4-3-3 style either. They have been scattergun. They have been bringing in players to fit whoever the current manager is, and that manager only lasts 6 months or a year or so, and then they send him through the revolving door and bring in the next mediocre manager to take charge. So there's no overarching theme in the transfer market for this Everton squad. It is spend money without really any thought. That is kind of their approach. In terms of how that affects Lampard, it means he inherited a squad that was mismatched. It means he inherited a squad that was entirely patchwork, that was put together for a bunch of different managers over the past 3 years that have completely different philosophies and styles from Lampard and what Everton themselves as a club need in order to work, in order to get their best work done and provide the best possible football that they can on the pitch. So Lampard was inheriting a really dysfunctional, out of balance squad. If you look at the forward options outside of Dominic Calvert-Lewin, there is no one really who can put the ball in the back of the net. Dwight McNeil, I think he's a good player. He's good with the ball at his feet. He has good delivery on his crosses, but he isn't a goal scorer. He has never been a goal scorer, and he probably never will be a goal scorer. So while he is a fine wide player, they have no one when Dominic Calvert-Lewin spends his 6 months that he spends on the injury table every year. They have no one who can fill that void. They have warm bodies who can step into the center forward position, but they have no one who can fill the goal scoring void, especially now that Richarlison has left the club. Now this is going to leave us with quite a conundrum in terms of who do they actually bring in to replace Frank Lampard. Now there are a few names being mentioned, the likes of Marcelino, Roberto Martinez, Luis Enrique. Like that would ever happen. The name that I like the best and that I think is the most practical and gives them the best chance of staying up is Sean Dyche. Now, the thing about Sean Dyche is he was at Burnley for 10 years, for nearly a decade, and overachieved with this club. He had a great Europa League run at the helm of Burnley, managed to keep them up when they really didn't have any business staying up on multiple occasions. And the only real negative or drawback to Sean Dyche's style is that he's very defensive. He plays ugly football. It's 4-4-2 hoofball. If his time at Burnley is to be taken as the holy grail of Sean Dyche's footballing philosophy. I don't think Everton fans, beggars can't be choosers here. They need someone who can come in and who can keep them up, because if this club gets relegated, they're at a real danger of the squad getting blown apart, blown into pieces, and the club potentially never recovering. They also have a brand new stadium that they are paying for, which is really, really massive because that adds a financial burden to the club. And if the club goes down, they are not going to have the incredibly important Premier League money that will help pay for this new stadium. So I think a manager like Sean Dyche is the best option available. There are a few more names that are kind of in the rotation. Wayne Rooney would be a popular choice with the fans. Everton is, of course, his boyhood club, and he had several stints there, was really good for them when he first broke onto the scene in the early 2000s. As that attacking midfield center forward option. However, his managerial career it's still fledgling. I'm not gonna insult the guy because I think he did the best job that he possibly could have with Derby County, considering the off the field issues that were plaguing Derby County, and those off the field issues are startlingly similar to the issues that Everton are currently facing when it comes to the new stadium and financial troubles. So Wayne Rooney is an option. He would certainly garner a lot of patience, and it would be a fan favorite, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's the best option. Sean Dyche, of course, has exponentially more experience than Wayne Rooney does and has managed successfully in Premier League relegation battles before. Another name being touted about is Duncan Ferguson, who was a coach at Everton for a number of years, and then in the summer he left his coaching position to try and gain managerial experience, and that hasn't really kicked on for them. So for him, he's currently unemployed. So that could be a potential option. However, Sean Dyche is also unemployed, so he wouldn't cost any money in order to bring him in. And I just don't see Duncan Ferguson getting the job over Sean Dyche. Now, let's say, for the sake of argument and practicality and making right decisions, which is quite a lot, quite a tall ask for this Everton hierarchy, that they bring in Sean Dyche. How could they line up if Sean Dyche is in charge? Now, I think it would be a 4-4-2 is kind of the most practical, the smartest approach to things right now, particularly a 4-4-2 mid block. In the past, you saw Dyche kind of lead a 4-4-2 deep block where everybody is really far behind the ball, where you put 10, maybe even all 11 players behind the ball. We do have Pickford in goal. He's probably their best player, if we're being all truthful. Pickford is probably the best player for Everton at the moment. I would rather see, to be honest, a 4-4-2 mid block. I think a mid block in the modern Premier League game provides the most flexibility, the most balance in the current state of the Premier League. You need to score goals if you're this Everton side. If you are Everton, you need to score goals. Now, an interesting thing here is they're bringing in Arnaud Danjuma from Villarreal. They're bringing in Arnaud Danjuma from Villarreal this January transfer window. Now, he's an interesting player. He's not particularly a prolific goal scorer, but he is tidy on the ball. He's comfortable on the ball. He's a bit bigger, more physical than the average player, certainly more than Neal Maupay. So I think he offers more of a replacement or rotation option with Calvert-Lewin, should Calvert-Lewin get injured or fail to kick on, because Calvert-Lewin's form over this season has not been good. He really hasn't been good since the first month or so under Rafa Benitez. Calvert-Lewin has been particularly unimpressive. So Arnaud Danjuma does provide some flexibility, and Arnaud Danjuma, Andres Townsend, Damari Gray, Neal Maupay, and Dominic Calvert-Lewin will make up the core of these central forward options. I think Damari Gray will probably play on the outside more often, but let's say they start a game with Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Neal Maupay as the options. They can bring off Maupay and bring on Damari Gray if they want someone with a little bit more spice, a little bit more attacking threat, a little bit more goal-scoring ability. They could bring this on and really not lose all that much in terms of the build-up and creativity. I think another interesting thing that we may potentially see is a box midfield or a three-man midfield, something like this. Now this is staggered, this is uneven, but I think what you would see in this sort of scenario, and it would probably be Neal Maupay rather than Damari Gray here, is you'll see Patterson and Iwobi shifting forward, and then a back three kind of forming with two midfielders in the providing defensive stability. Onana and Gay is a very defensive pairing, with Dwight McNeil offering width On the left-hand side, Patterson and Iwobi offering attacking threat and width on the right-hand side. And I think both Neal Maupay, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, all three of Neal Maupay, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and Alex Iwobi are comfortable occupying these hold-up positions, these hold-up areas. And I think all three of Neal Maupay, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and Alex Iwobi offer hold-up skills and capabilities in the center of the park, in the central areas right here that they're going to need. So I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that, where Alex Iwobi, where Idrissa Gana Gueye, comes in for, say, Damari Gray or for Anthony Gordon and offers extra protection in the midfield. I wouldn't be surprised if then their kind of defensive shape looks a little bit more like this. Maybe you shift Neal Maupay out wide right, because I think Neal Maupay, Alex Iwobi, and Nathan Patterson can do a job defensively together. You may even see Alex Iwobi shift over onto the other side so that you can have Amadou Onana or Idrissa Gana Gueye offering more defensive stability on this weaker right-hand side. I think this is a really interesting option to consider, because I think while you're typically, you're vacating space, this right-handed winger, you're vacating that role, you can still find other ways to create balance in this squad. So I wouldn't be surprised, if Sean Dyche or whoever it is that comes in does have options. And Arnaud Danjuma is a good player who can play for Dominic Calvert-Lewin if he isn't firing or if he is injured. Another potential way that they could line up is something like this, with a three center back pairing, or three center back rotation and partnership with Mina, Cody, and Tarkowski, playing the three central defenders. This, of course, would be very defensive. You would play in a very deep block and probably bring on Arnaud Danjuma and Dominic Calvert-Lewin, play both of them here with the likes of Dwight McNeil, Nathan Patterson, and Alex Iwobi, offering your long ball threat, your ranged passing, and you try to nick goals off of corners. This would be very similar in terms of idea and broad concepts to Sean Dyche's Burnley, where they sat in a very deep, very low block, putting all 11 players behind the ball, and then they would get forward, rarely try and get a corner kick, and convert their corner with the likes of Chris Wood and James Tarkowski. And if you do go this route, you've got a lot of height and physicality in this side. Yerry Mina is 6'4", Amadou Onana is 6'5", Dominic Calvert-Lewin is 6'3", Arnaud Danjuma is 6'2", James Tarkowski is 6'2", Connor Cody 6'1", Mikolenko I think is even 6 foot or 6'1" as well. Andres Townsend on the bench offers height and physicality. This could be another potential way. I'm not particularly keen on this sort of approach, this mentality, but it could be a way that this team lines up. So that's going to wrap everything up for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you learned something from this. The main takeaways, of course, regarding Everton, Frank Lampard and his sacking, to be specific, they're in a lot of financial trouble. They have lost over £100 million each year in each of the past 3 years. This has to do with the stadium expenses, with the bad signings, and just overall poor decision making in terms of managers and wages. So there's a lot of financial issues that the club are facing right now, a lot of on-field and squad balancing issues that the club are facing right now, and a lack of quality managers and identity around this club. It's a really difficult, scary time to be an Everton fan, as they are staring down a cliff at relegation. I hope that you guys learned something from this video. Thank you so much for listening, False Nine Show listeners, and I will see you at the next one.